Well, welcome, Guru Dharam. Thank you so much for answering my email that came out of the blue and agreeing to be our guest speaker for our community. Angus and I are so thrilled to speak with you and to catch up. We were just saying before we started the recording, it's been a couple of decades probably since we've spoken.
Yeah.
And we just found out you're living in Sweden.
Thanks for the invite, and the pleasure's all mine. Yeah, indeed. I've now got dual nationality, Swedish to go with my English nationality, and yeah, it's a really good base to be here because most of what you hear about Sweden is correct about it being sort of kind of liberal, left wing, fairly intelligent in terms of government policy, and the society kind of, it's like joined up, everything actually does work pretty well. So for all these reasons,
that's great.
It's okay.
We might think about spending more time in Sweden.
No, and it really is lovely to see you. And Rahini and I were, I don't say we were in a heated debate, but we were trying to figure out how we actually found you in the first place. And I think that Rahini in the end decided that she was perhaps looking for somewhere to do yoga. That maybe led her to your door. I don't know, but I had a health condition at the time, so that's why I ended up seeing you for acupuncture.
That's right. Yeah. Did you come for that first, or did you come to the yoga first?
Well, I think I came for the yoga first, and we have to just say, and especially since quite a few of our community members are in England, that Guru Dharam, you are the best practitioner of acupuncture and Chinese medicine that we have ever experienced in our entire lives. And we've seen quite a few people now living in California. So
it's actually, I have to say, you've ruined acupuncture for me, because now everybody I see just doesn't live up to your standards. And I have seen a lot of people. And I don't know if you remember, I mean, initially I came to you, I had been diagnosed with MS. So that was perhaps the reason that,
you know what, I remember that you'd come for treatment, but I couldn't remember what for.
Yeah.
File somewhere, but no, I didn't remember that actually, Angus. No.
Yeah, no, you wouldn't. And it would have been because I probably had some sort of flare up, which I was getting every now and again. And anyway, cut a long story short, it turned out to be mercury poisoning. So I now have a clean bill of health, but I lived with that for 12 years under the assumption that I had MS, because that's something that the British medical establishment had established, I guess. But yeah, that's why I would come and see you.
Yeah, Angus hasn't had any flare up since he had all of his fillings removed. They stopped happening after that.
Yeah,
they're really.
And then anyway, I tried to continue having acupuncture in the States, and the one thing I really remember about your acupuncture is the needles would go in and they wouldn't hurt. It was just you had some sort of kind of magical ability to put the needles in and they didn't hurt. And then I ended up, funnily enough, when my career as a photographer started to go on the wane, I had one summer where I basically was trying to make ends meet, and I ended up working in the front office of an acupuncturist here in Los Angeles. And he very kindly would treat me as because I was there. But it was like having knitting needles stuck in my body. It was so painful. And I longed for the days of Guru Dharam where you had that very deft touch as far as I was concerned.
Yeah.
Well, it's lovely to hear. So your photography is not a professional thing anymore, or are you still doing it?
Yeah, no, it's I don't think I've taken a shot in anger for about
anger.
Oh, that's a term of phrase.
Oh.
For about maybe 5 years. I haven't done anything professionally for probably longer. But
right.
Yeah, we've become, well, I've become a transformational coach along with my dear wife Rahini. Who kind of paved the way for me on that front, and now we work together and we do work with couples and we have a community.
It looks great. I saw the website. Looks really good.
Yeah.
So yes, in the autumn of my years, I have a whole new profession.
So we'd love to hear what you're up to, and also I'd love to hear more of your backstory, because I know that you went to RADA, and so just whatever you're comfortable, willing to share about your journey related to coming to where you are now, I think would be really interesting.
East 15, not RADA.
Oh, East 15. Sorry, excuse me.
East 15. Yeah. My dad taught at RADA, and my uncle went to RADA. And so, yeah, you know, that was like the family business, really, acting. And so I got into that. And I was doing fringe theatre, started getting TV work. And then I got into yoga. So what happened is that, you know, work was coming in, which, as you know, is pretty good if you're in that particular game. But I knew that temperamentally I wouldn't like to be not working. And so I thought, okay, well, realistically, I'm not going to be acting all the time. So what am I interested in? And the yoga by then was, you know, like totally fascinating me. And my particular interest in the yoga was its sort of therapeutic application. And so I kind of delved into the teachings, looking particularly at things like, you know, healing circles, healing with sound. And I was kind of thinking, okay, maybe I could train in that at a kind of professional level. And I looked around, and at that time in the UK, there wasn't a kind of professional level Ayurvedic course. But there was some Chinese medicine going on. And I was kind of like, oh, that would be great. And I found a course and started that. And that really kind of took on a whole new impetus and momentum. And as soon as I was sort of, well, in fact, before I'd finished training, I'd sort of had this little practice going. And of course, as you'll appreciate, the kind of dual perspective of yoga and all that contains with Chinese medicine, they were a really interesting kind of relational, mutually illuminating subjects that I found totally fascinating, and that sort of I guess defined me as a practitioner of acupuncture, as you were saying so kindly, Angus, and as how I see Kundalini yoga. So I'd begun teaching, and you know, the teaching and the practice, of course, sort of fed each other in a very good way. More sort of mutual complementarity, and so I then started teaching people to be yoga teachers. And it must have been about that time. I don't know if I started that when you were still there, but if not, it would be very soon after, because I think the first official Kundalini training courses were in '95, and we'd already been doing unofficial ones for 2 or 3 years. And then when the official course came out, we sort of switched to that. That would have been in about '95. So it was kind of up to that point that the acting just kind of it just sort of dissipated. I never took a decision, okay, right, that's it, I'm not an actor. And in fact, I still kind of think, maybe, maybe I should go and do some more acting. And of course, the business doesn't really work like that. You know, once you're out, it's not so easy to get back in. But I suppose it's the thing about it is that it's very creative, and it's creative in a way that I love, because, it's rather like, we can talk about the karmic narrative and the person's history. And, drama is, of course, exactly about that at a kind of heightened level, or a kind of an archetypal level. But then, of course, yoga is so archetypal as well. In that sense, we're all like, whether we see ourselves as that kind of magicians, sorceresses, healers, it's kind of, it's all that vibe in a really beautiful way.
I love that. I hadn't thought about yoga as archetypal, but I can see that. And then one of the other things that you introduced us to while we were there was the shamanic journeys through sound.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I've sort of followed as well. Usually as a sort of adjunct to healing. So the first kind of shamanic practice I got into was essentially Mayan Toltec awakened dreaming. And so I sort of stayed with that for a few years, with a couple of teachers, and, teachers like students, they sort of come and go. And then some West African practice in Cote d'Ivoire. And so for me, again, this was like, what was so fascinating was looking at some of the practices, say in Toltec dreaming, and how they look at the energy body, for example, and kind of comparing and contrasting that with the energy body from the Kundalini perspective. And so that's always kind of, it's always been that kind of cross, kind of the sort of perspectives of these traditions that seem to have common roots somewhere way back, has always been totally fascinating for me, and still is.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? I think that it's perhaps easy to sort of follow a modality or a discipline and say, yeah, this is my lane, I'm going to stay in it. And it sounds like from what you're saying is that you've explored all kinds of different modalities, but you've seen the common thread, which I think is I think that's the way to travel. That's beautiful. And I can see how they're all coming together in a kind of magnificent way.
I think that's the thing. I mean, yes, for me, sort of identifying common threads is kind of always fascinating and inspiring. I think the thing about it is that as a healer and as a therapist, it's rather like the only thing we can be, if we're going to be effective, is ourself. And it's kind of like, finding whatever aspect of spirituality it is that enables you to engage with yourself at a deeper level. And so, I've always, it's rather like I've had these kinds of sort of postgraduate interdisciplinary kind of activities that have always been really important to me. I suppose my base practice has always included some Kundalini yoga.
Yeah.
And so, in that sense, that's been the kind of primary sort of circuit of learning and practicing. But this weekend, for example, I'm going off to Paris to teach a course that I call Kundalini Shaman Medicine for the 21st Century. And
you sign up, I want to come.
and this is to kind of present the kind of the two archetypes, the yogi, the shaman, and compare and contrast and look at different practices and so on.
Yeah, so, I think it's lovely not to be puritanical in our approaches and to really be open to what we get impacted by.
Well, I think, that sort of puritanical streak, for my mind, is too close to, the zealot and the fanatic and the fundamentalist.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's our sort of very much our common enemy, if you like. Because once a person is on that side of things, then they tend to lose the sort of simple reality that it's all one and we are all part of that one. And therefore to say, this is the only way and you're either with us or you're against us is kind of, requires a bit more work.
That's true. Very true.
And so many people seem to want to follow that thread and get kind of tribal about things too. It's interesting.
They do, and I think this is basic sort of, this is about security, and they tend to feel more secure in this is the form, and we do this, we don't do that, all the way down the line. And it's like wherever that takes you, eventually it'll take you to the place where you need to rethink and have a more kind of accepting understanding and a bit more non-attachment about methodology.
Yeah. And I also think, like, I'm thinking about my fanaticism in yoga, and when I met you, Angus,
in the early days,
Angus helped soften my fanaticism. But it was my first introduction to an experience that was beyond my personal mind. And I hadn't had any other experiences that gave that to me. And so I became very attached to that form. And, as I've done with so many things in my life, dragged Angus into it, very gratefully, though, I think ultimately. But then over time, like you said, I started to, and especially I think with the shamanic work that you introduced us to, realizing that, there isn't just one way to have that experience. And there's, now there's the conversation between the indirect path towards that, the direct path, the non-dual path. And it's just realizing that, it's what really aligns with ourselves in the space, in that moment in time of where we're at. And whatever opens our heart cannot be a bad thing. It's like, follow that and see where it takes you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm curious, in terms of your experience with healing, what you notice is common themes, like if there's anything around healing, is because healing is still something that I'm very passionate about, whether it's not just psychologically but physically too. So I'm just curious if there is anything that you'd like to share on what you've noticed as a healer over the years.
My basic model for effective healing, irrespective of the specific discipline, so whether I'm talking about Chinese medicine or yoga therapy, or any modality, is that if, or rather when, the therapist is working on the principle of the three, then it will be very effective. And the three is, first is the therapist, healer, whatever they kind of style themselves. Second is the person receiving, patient, client, whatever we style them as. And the third point is the energy of neutrality, the energy of high frequency, the energy of God, goddess. So if, as the healer, when we're working with anybody or whatever the context is, we're consciously connecting to that third point, then it's like we're consciously bringing in, if you like, the field of infinity. You can call it, like golden chain, like in Kundalini, or you can call it the field of merit, as in Buddhist Dharma. As long as you're maintaining that connection to that third point, then the person receiving is really going to receive.
Beautiful.
It's interesting for me because I now think of my experience with you, and perhaps why there was such a stark contrast between my experience with you and maybe other practitioners of acupuncture. Is it did feel when I was being treated like you, it was like it was almost like you were in a meditation. It almost felt like you're putting these needles in me, and there's a quality to it that feels a lot like meditation. I didn't know that at the time, but now kind of looking back, I vividly remember how you would show up, and that feels like the quality of how you showed up. You were in this sort of meditative state almost.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so then theoretically, this is the kind of theory, assuming the healer has a reasonably developed energy body, and we can talk about whether that's the radiant body or the aura or whatever, but if that energy body is if you like set enough and strong enough, then using that principle of 3, the healer person effectively invites the person being healed into that frequency, into that auric field, and then decisions about what needs to happen really go on up there at the 3rd point. Mm-hmm. And so this is like, on the one hand, yes, as a healer, as a therapist, I have my understanding of the 5 elements, the 10 Kundalini bodies, the 16 sub-personalities, all of that stuff that we learn, right? Yes, of course you do your homework and you're kind of thinking, okay, I'm going to do this because. And then you kind of do that, but at the same time as doing it, you totally kind of let go and say, but if you've got a better idea, please. And then you just literally hold the space. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of done deal.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating in a sense that on one level, it could appear to be very complicated, but on another level, it seems like it's very simple too.
Exactly.
It's like a letting go of all that.
Exactly. That's exactly it, Angus. It's rather like, Chinese medical theory is it's like simultaneously and incredibly frustratingly completely simple and impossible to kind of get hold of. And yet, if you exactly. But if you can live with that, then it will be. But you can do the simple stuff, and it will do the sophisticated stuff.
Yeah. So I guess another way of describing it is like that's getting into a flow state. Like, so an athlete has all the ability and they have all the practice and the learning under their belt, and yet they get on the field of play and they have a moment where they just have to let all that go and just play.
Exactly.
Like flow state. Yeah.
Exactly. And so this is why, for the Chinese, they have, I can't remember the terminology now, but it literally means, yes, you have all the kind of intellectual, academic discipline aspect of it, but then you learn how to be, as we would say, you learn how to become zero. Mm-hmm. And then those two states will kind of will co-connect and co-create and heal the person.
Yeah. So how do you learn how to become zero? I guess that's the burning question.
Well, I mean, that's interesting, because in yoga, or certainly in Kundalini, you talk about the state of pratyahara, which is the 5th of the eight steps of the great one, and from pratyahara you go into shunya, and shunya is considered the 0 state. Pratyahara is when you withdraw the senses, so it's like the sensory field, instead of kind of going outwards, you flip it so it goes inward, then you turn it right down, and that's most people call that pratyahara the withdrawal of the senses. And for Patanjali, this is why it's so interesting, is that you go from, if you like, yamas, niyamas, do's and don'ts, and then it's asana, physical form, then it's pranayam, and then the next four are all about the inner state that those first four will take you to.
Mm.
And the fifth one, pratyahara, in Kundalini, we talk about it more as synchronization. And it's this idea that, you're full of thoughts. Well, whatever those thoughts are, let's try and separate them out a bit, and let's give them all absolutely equal energy, weight, meaning.
Mm-hmm.
No more, no less. And then once you kind of detach them all, this is important and that's not important, and picking up the dog food is really important, but the dry cleaning isn't, kind of thing. It's like you just kind of, they all just become simple thoughts that you then put kind of like in a circle in the mind, like in a mala. And then as you continue your meditation, then they sort of like merge into one. And finally, there's just one left. And, you keep meditating until that dissolves into the empty space. And then you've got the blank screen. And that blank screen is what you then introduce. They call it the Vajra, the thunderbolt of the mantra. And then when you introduce the mantra, or all of that kind of seed, energy, and force into a blank screen, then of course it lights up like neon, and you can totally kind of merge with it.
Beautiful.
And so that's the kind of the importance of zero energy. And in relation to, what's healing, how does healing work? It brings us back to that really wonderful saying of the Chinese sage, in which he said, "The sage does nothing, but nothing remains undone." That's like you're saying, the sage is in the space, is in the zero space, is meditating, is off with the fairies, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But around him, everything is kind of done deal.
So then the curiosity for me is that to get to that point as a practitioner, to sort of, I'm assuming you tune into that space, but you have a reference point of what that space is, because of perhaps all of the time that you have dedicated to meditating in the way that you just described it. It's almost like, for the practice and discipline of meditation, you have a reference point of that space. And is that why it's so much easier? Because I'm assuming when you're with a client, you're not gonna go through all those steps. You just tune in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it becomes, it's like the healing space that is easiest to kind of create and maintain if it's your own space, kind of thing. But if it's not, if you're, I don't know, going to some town once a week and practicing there, then you have to set that vibe up. And then you do that with a couple of simple things, maybe some frankincense or some sage, or I usually play some kind of mantra music very low, very softly, and just create a vibe.
Amazing.
Just drop in.
That's it, exactly.
I was going to say that Angus works also, in addition to the work that we do, he works with clients at a treatment center a couple of times a week, and you teach a group and do one-on-one sessions. But really that work is also you just kind of dropping, like when you talk about your groups, you will often talk about how you kind of find that zone and sort of drop in, and those are the best groups that you do.
I mean, yes, well, I don't know. I feel like, I think I'm assuming I probably drop into some, I think it's purely accidental if I do. I think there's something about showing up and being vulnerable and being honest and authentic that at some point I think I get a sense of what Guru Dharam is pointing to. I'm really fascinated by by this term frequency. So you started out by saying that that's something that you were initially interested in.
Yeah.
And I think that for me is I don't know, is there a frequency to me showing up and being authentic and vulnerable and being honest? It's kind of like,
Absolutely.
is there a frequency? Yeah. So
yeah, absolutely.
So I think that
mean,
perhaps
that's certainly a heart frequency.
Right.
A heart frequency, because showing up, being honest, being authentic, that's all heart stuff.
Yeah, can you speak some more about that? Because I'm all ears for that to know more about that.
Well, it's rather like the discipline of being a coach or being a psychotherapist makes us alert to different avenues of approach we can take. But as, or more important than that, is being with someone and hearing them and seeing them. And that kind of empathy is purely human to human. And the one thing we have to build, whatever kind of therapist we are, to our patient client, is the bridge. Mm-hmm. Which goes back to any and all yogas you've ever practiced, the bridge, the yoke, the connection. Mm-hmm. Whether we're talking about, the individual microcosm to the great macrocosm, that kind of connection, or just the connection, I've got to get myself together because I'm feeling all over the place. And then we kind of, pull everything back together so that we're one. Then we go and sit with someone else to try and help them. But all of that activity is very much about the heart center. And interestingly, the Aquarian age that we're at, pretty much at the beginning of, is all about the heart center. The prevailing frequency of the Aquarian age is the heart center. And we're all, as a civilization, we're trying to scramble out of being connected to the third chakra, the chakra below. Mm-hmm. And that's why, there's so much still kind of animalistic sort of animosity, territory, and people trying to hold on to that way of relating to each other and the world. Mm-hmm. And of course, it can't go on for forever, because the Aquarian energy is a completely different vibe. But in some respects, it's all we know. Or if you're like a bridge generation like we were educated in that energy. And so now we see, what do we see? Well, we see the kind of great institutions of society having to redraw themselves and review themselves in an Aquarian vibe. Can they do it? But it's very difficult. Mm-hmm. Because the power that they held on to then, they don't want to relinquish it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, it still doesn't work for them now in the way that it did. So they're all a bit kind of like, what's happening? Can anybody tell us what's happening?
Yeah, and so, and then you do seem to sort of get a sense that there is this strong sentiment. No, but we're gonna stick with what we know, kind of like what we were talking about earlier. Yeah, it's like, this is my lane, and anything else looks scary and unknown to me.
Yeah,
and you do sort of see a world that we live in that I guess the way that I would relate to it, that sort of chakra below is kind of like, that's the sort of egocentric mind, the sort of individual that wants to sort of fight for its own individual rights and is afraid that the world is going to come crashing down around them if they don't look at it from any other vantage point.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And it's like, it just goes back to the thing, who likes change? Nobody likes change. Right. We try to help people to change, but it isn't easy. And it isn't even easy for us who, we go our yoga and our therapy and everything. It's still challenging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, you know, for me, this is like the, it's kind of like, it's like with technology kind of accelerating at this incredible pace and us getting deeper into the Aquarian age. It's kind of like, well, how are we actually going to, as a community, as a society, really get deeper, more deeply connected to the heart rather than our navel point? And I think, you know, essentially the work we're all doing is to help people and society do that.
Yeah, in the broader way.
In the
I
broader
think
way.
that's one of the reasons that we wanted to have a community experience, because I started to think about the one-on-one work that we do, the individual work that we do, which is powerful and transformative. But it seems that healing in community, which is so accessible and isn't, just seems like it's going to be how transformation can unfold and how we can support each other with the changes that are happening. And that doesn't have to be limited access or exclusive. It can be very inclusive in the way that we
Precisely. Precisely. Yeah.
You know, one of our teachers, one of the terms that he would use would be that this or that person was consciously, what was it, unconscious competent. I think that's kind of how maybe I have managed to sort of muscle my way through doing this work. And I'll give you an example. When I was sort of debating whether I wanted to do this work or not, and we actually had a program that we were going to teach in London, and I had always kind of like decided that, you know, I'll let this be an experience that I'm going to have, and I'll decide whether I want to do this work based on how well this experience goes. And I was kind of terrified to go to London and go and teach the English, who are going to like see right through me. It's maybe I can get away with murder here in America
with your accent.
not in London. And I think we're in the taxi on the way there, and I was probably having a bit of a meltdown. And Rahini says, like, all you need to do is just love them. You just got to show up and love them. And I felt like that's the only thing I can do, because at this point I'm completely wet behind the ears. I don't have a great deal of study under my belt, so I'm just going to love them. And the amazing thing was they had an incredible experience. It went so well, but that taught me a real lesson. And it's kind of like, I feel like what you're saying now, you know, with getting into that sort of heart-centered chakra mode. Sorry, not to articulate myself very well,
frequency.
But frequency. There's something really powerful about that, and I've seen that happen again and again and again. That seems to be my greatest asset for us all, I guess. And that's what you're saying now. It's like at that frequency, that's the frequency of healing.
That's the frequency of healing, and it's kind of, it's like in opposition to the ego. And you know, one of your strengths, Angus, is you've never really had an out of control ego.
I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yeah, but maybe I should check.
Angus, you have a huge heart.
But really, you know, and it's also true that, you know, healing now, it's sort of like it's almost like it's sexy business. Everybody wants to be a healer, and you get a lot of kind of people who, you know, they don't really have their ego in check. And ego and healing, it can't happen. They're kind of.
It's amazing, isn't it? Because there are so many healers out there who've got all kinds of study and plaques on their wall, but without that heart-centered approach,
precisely
for nothing.
And you know, that's been your base all along, and that's who you are as a healer, which is why they all love you.
I have days where my ego gets the better of me, for sure.
We all do. But I love what you're saying in terms of the orientation that we can have. We're all going to have our human moments where we get caught up, and as Angus would say, I might get wobbly headed from time to time. But the that pull into that heart space, and the way that you're speaking to it, we come to it with whatever our skills are, our training is, you know, all of the different things. And I'm grateful for all of the different trainings that I've received over the years, from yoga to becoming a licensed psychotherapist to shamanic work to psychedelic experience. Like, all of the stuff has been profound in terms of opening up and softening that space of love that is impersonal. And it does seem really simple, even, and I know, and I don't want to diminish I'm not diminishing it by saying how simple it is, because it's like, what I realize is that so much of the training that can fall away when we come into the simplicity of what it is to be with ourselves and be with another in that space that isn't intellectual, that doesn't require the remembering of all of those things, that there's something greater that's unfolding when we drop into that mystery and allow whatever unfolds in that mystery to happen. And yet, as you were saying with the Chinese medicine, like, every step along the way has been valuable, even though it looks like it's not needed. It's like the paradox of it all.
Precisely.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
Anything else, Angus?
Oh yeah, I could go on all day.
Well, we have a bit more time.
Well, I think the other thing that I'm curious about, because you're talking about frequency. I saw a TED talk not so long ago with this lady, and she's a scientist, and you know, I don't need to go into her narrative around the TED talk, but there was a point where she talks about she has the experience of being in a healing circle, and this healing circle are filled with very compassionate and empathic women. And I think forgiveness was the topic of this healing circle. So because she's a scientist and she specifically works with frequency, she takes them into a lab, but I guess wires them up to electrodes. I don't know what technology she uses, but they are all emitting this alpha frequency. And in the study that she then goes through, she then manages to get hold of a group of meditating Tibetan monks, I think they are, and they are also giving off this alpha frequency.
Brainwaves, alpha
brainwaves.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
All
beg your pardon, but I assume brainwaves and frequency, we're kind of talking about the same language.
Well, different brainwaves are at different frequencies.
Yeah, so I came away from seeing that or listening to what she had to say, and there's a part of me like wants to wonder, is that the healing frequency? Is that the frequency or love? Is that the frequency of zero? And I guess I wanted to ask that question because I think no better person to answer it than you in that respect, or my curiosity about it. Yeah.
Well, if we take brain frequency, then states of meditation and creativity are associated with going to theta and or delta, coming down from beta and alpha. So beta is kind of excitement and stress, and alpha is kind of a bit less than that, but sort of active consciousness and thought patterns. But then once you go deeper, then you're into states where the creativity of the individual can really bloom and flourish. And mostly, when you connect up some llamas with the electrodes and stuff, then that's what happens. They can get down to a lower frequency quite quickly. The zero state is well, there's different terminology around it, but if we think of the idea of getting the mind to a point where it's essentially clear of any extraneous thought, and we've got a kind of a blank canvas, then that is also associated with a zero phase, into which we can then add whatever it is. And the whatever it is will usually be some form of mantra or a yantra, like a kind of a geometric design, whose effect is to transmit bioinformation that then the meditator can receive. In order to be able to do that, they have to get to what we're calling the 0 point first. And that's pratyahara, and that in turn is associated with a delta phase or a theta phase, which in turn are actually conducive to lucid dreaming, awakened dreaming. And that's the kind of connection to a lot of sort of shamanic practice.
Fascinating.
It is. I mean, I think I always kind of come a little bit late to the party because and also I think this was all obviously staring me in the face when I first came across the Kundalini. But I feel like I want to get serious about meditation. Serious is maybe the wrong word to use, but I'm now really curious about the potential of meditation.
Right.
And I've kind of I guess I'm playing around with it, but I haven't necessarily decided, I'm going to follow this particular modality or. But I am trying to sort of experiment with clearing my, mind of thought and using breath.
Well, I see it slightly differently. The way that I see it is the way I remember the two of you. I remember, Angus and Rohini, they're a kind of Kundalini power couple, and there's kind of real impetus. And in those days, you were the photographer, you were the model. I think that's what you're doing in London. Yeah. But, that was either going to continue to happen or not. That wasn't really, but clearly you were both very motivated with all this work. And so, I was delighted, but not at all surprised when I got the email from Rahina and the link to your rewilding, and thought, it makes perfect sense. So in my world, you've been sort of you've definitely been on the journey and on the path for these 20 years, Angus. And whether you've taken a couple of detours here and there, well, who hasn't?
Definitely fallen off the path.
There's no such thing as falling off the path.
No, exactly.
I maybe been tethered to you and you've managed to pull me back on it.
That's true. That's what he's talking about with you not having an ego, which I do think is a little bit detrimental because I don't know that you really see yourself clearly.
Maybe not. I don't know.
So anyway, but I love that, the Kundalini power couple.
Yeah, you wouldn't have thought that if you saw me swearing like a trooper when we were unceremoniously dumped in that field in the pouring rain
in New Mexico.
in Mexico.
Yeah.
I just thought that was just I thought the next 4 days are going to be like Woodstock at its worst. It was like around in the
yeah, well, exactly, Woodstock without the good music.
Exactly.
No drugs, and we did have Guru Singh going around with his guitar singing in the morning. That was lovely.
Stuff.
Well, Guru Dharam, it's been so much fun catching up with you.
Yes, so
great to connect. Yeah,
I have a plan to be teaching somewhere in your locality. Is it Joshua Tree? In Joshua Tree.
Oh, that's the desert. Yeah, that's a couple of hours from where we are.
I think it's well, I'm not sure. Ramona is a friend of ours, and she's based there, so I'm going to connect you up because she does some kind of PR stuff for me, some Instagram and all that. Yes. She's really, really cool person. So she's got a plan to kind of get me out there, because I haven't been to LA for quite a few years now. So when I do, link up and go.
Joshua Tree is the place to do it. It's beautiful out there.
Oh, the energy.
That's photographs. It looks amazing.
Yeah, it is incredible. Amazing. Well, we'd love to stay in touch. Let us know, and then also make sure we have your information that you'd like us to share with our group, so that they can connect with you.
Oh yeah, I will do. Yeah, I'll ask. That'll probably come from Harry Dev.
Perfect.
Who's that's my kind of helper, administrator.
Excellent.
Really great to see you both again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
lovely to see you.
Sending you lots of love.
Yeah,
And
likewise.
enjoy Sweden.
Yes.
Yes.
Take care, Guru Dharam.
Take care. Lots of love.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.